Welcome to ThinkTech on OC16, Hawaii's weekly newscast on things that matter to tech and to Hawaii. I'm Jay Fidell.
And I'm Duke Oishi.
In our show tonight, we'll interview two local boys who were in Japan at the time of the earthquake and tsunami on March 10th.
We'll also consider their views as to what the earthquake and tsunami mean to Japan in the long term.
First, we'll meet Ray Tsuchiyama, a local boy who has lived in Japan for years and who blogs for Forbes magazine and consults for Google in Tokyo. Our Asia in Review hosts, Bill Sharp and David Day, caught Ray for a fast-moving interview right after Ray touched down in Honolulu.
Do you think Japan is handling the situation well? Will Japan recover? Will this snap Japan back after it's helped to snap Japan back after this sort of 20-year period of, well, some people will call it decline?
Well, that's a really tough question because
that's the kind we like here.
It's short term, we still haven't come out of the woods. Mm-hmm. The short term is we're still in a crisis. The days following the earthquake and the tsunami were horrendous days of blackouts, of trains not running, thousands stranded in Tokyo, hoarding in supermarkets, and of course evacuation of foreigners from Tokyo, all kinds of, well, it's a mess in Tokyo right now. And in the longer term...
in Tokyo, yeah, or in Tohoku, the northeast section of Japan?
I'm just talking about Tokyo, what I can see. Of course, okay. In the news, the hardest hit areas by the tsunami and earthquake were the communities and smaller towns along the eastern coast, stretching from Hachinohe, where I was born, a long time ago in Aomori Prefecture, and many fishing villages along the coast. So it's of a personal kind of linkage there. Sure. That I was born there, and my father was stationed as part of the 1st Cavalry Division during the Korean War. And so the devastation is real. We still don't know the real numbers. It could be as high as 10,000 people. But we have to really see this in perspective also. When the earthquake hit, I was in the middle of Tokyo in Yurakucho. I saw 20-story, 30-story buildings swaying like they were like toys. I saw cranes bobbing up and down. I felt the earth move. Yet, the buildings did not fall.
Of course, Yurakucho is right in the center of Tokyo, right at the beginning of the Ginza, and this is an area where they were going to have the best built buildings.
Right, and of course, and Tokyo had very little damage when you think about it.
But and your point is that given the magnitude of that earthquake, that is a huge testament to the quality of construction in Japan, like you might see in San Francisco.
That's very true, and of course Tokyo has been hit by rolling blackouts and so forth, but the rest of Japan, Osaka, Nagoya, Fukuoka, Nagasaki, Hiroshima, cities, Kobe, are going with business as usual.
Right.
Kyushu, which people in the West don't really think about, if it was independent, it would be the GDP size of Australia, of Canada. So think about. You have to take it in perspective. The great earthquake of 1923 that hit Tokyo, 150,000 deaths. The earthquake that hit Sichuan, Chengdu, that area in central China, just in 2008, had 60,000 deaths. Right. That's only a few years ago. Right. So we're talking, of course, the deaths are horrendous, and I feel this very painfully. But again, relatively speaking, Kobe had 7,000 deaths. It was a major city, city with headquarters of Kobe Steel and many, but they came back. Actually, the GDP of Japan came back a few years, 2 or 3 years afterwards, because of reinvestment and of course the rebuilding of Kobe and so forth.
I think that's a good point, because I think that all this devastation is really going to create a huge demand for new cars, all those cars that were floating down a river, new fishing vessels, construction. And I think it's really good to point out that this is only limited to one section of Japan, thankfully.
Right.
But doesn't it seem like Japan is really being sort of at nature's mercy lately. There's not only the tsunami and the problem with the nuclear meltdown or potential meltdown, but then there was a volcano last week, I think it was, in Kyushu as well. Japan really lives at the mercy of nature.
Well, it's if I talked about Japan and an earthquake to friends from MIT or in geophysics or Caltech, they'll just that's the way it is. I mean, there have always been earthquakes. There's always been fires in Edo and natural disasters. But you had a very interesting point earlier about can Japan suddenly snap out of the stagnation and so-called decline and so forth, the economy and culture. And when you look at Japan, at 2 points of its history were very dynamic kind of turning points. One was the Meiji era, the years following the restoration of the emperor and the downfall of the Tokugawa shogunate in 1868. The years following, people actually thought of adopting English as an official language. People went and saw the West, industrialization began, and so forth. And of course, the post-war period. When you think of Sony, Kyocera, Toyota, Nissan, Matsushita, they were startups. They were little startups after the war. And Tokyo was devastated. And it was nothing. 80-90% of the cities of Tokyo and Yokohama were burnt out, shells. But they all came back and became a major economic power by the time of the great turning symbolic 1964, the Tokyo Olympics, which I was there. I witnessed it. And it was a great turning point for the economy, just like Beijing, recently, the Olympics there in Seoul, in Korea. So when you talk about turning points, can this be a turning point for Japan? But in what way? Because there's one author who wrote a book recently and published that the 1923 earthquake and the deaths and the turnaround of society made Japan very nationalistic, xenophobic. And that was the beginning of the war, beginning of World War II. It made Japan, yes, the foreign powers did nothing for us. We have to go out our place in the sun. We have to get more. We have to stabilize our food supply. We have to go out and so forth. And it took barely 20 years till 1941. So what can this earthquake be? I'm not saying that this will be a road to nationalism, but can Japan suddenly stop and think? Is nuclear power the only way to go forward for energy? Is a life full of luxuries and branded goods, a good life, is a slower life worth living through bicycles, renewable energy, and so forth, is a world where people go out and contribute to other societies for young people, like a Peace Corps. Is that a new path? And again, all these ideas, again, and of course the biggest issue of all, which is not talked about in the society, but always there, immigration. If nobody's going to go back to these devastated places, well, there's people who would love to get a Japanese passport and rebuild communities in fishing, agriculture, and so forth from around the world. Can Japan adopt a kindly, gentler immigration policy that embraces people from the outside and have a blend of other cultures? Now, this is a very $64 billion question when it comes up, because I believe that for the U.S., one of the two startups in Silicon Valley was done either by a Chinese or Indian immigrant. And again, in Japan, there are no immigrants. I'm a liberal toward immigration, and that Japan can be a more open society, can become a more global society. Maybe this is the impetus for something new. I hope so.
To see how the people of Japan responded, how they're working together, to see the high degree of civility that prevailed, the orderliness, the patience, people waiting in lines for emergency supplies, no looting. I think that really shows a very positive side of Japanese civilization and Japanese culture. And I'm really moved by this sense of sacrifice that's found in the workers and the reactors. On the other side of the coin, I think one has to ask themselves some pretty serious questions about the Tokyo Electric Power Company. This is a huge corporation very powerful, lots of political clout. There was all kinds of previous citations for failure on its part to observe safety standards. Ray was saying that, well, there needs to be a move for greater transparency in Japan. Well, that's true. I think a lot of younger Japanese would agree with that, but that's changing a lot of culture too, and that sort of stuff changes real slowly. Did the Japanese really have the guts, the kanjo, to deal with the situation? Ray talked about the spirit of ganman, or rather, doing your best, go for broke, that kind of thing. Especially does the younger Japanese generation have it? We know that the older Japanese generation, that what we might call Japan's best generation, I mean, they came roaring back from World War II and accomplished great feats within a very short period of time. The younger generation, they all sort of grew up in the cushy, comfy, post-world Japan, all the goodies, of life. And in Japan, they used to call this group, and still do, to the best of my knowledge, the kizoku, the sort of the young nobility. Does this generation have the stuff to really bring Japan back? Maybe not only out of this crisis, but I think, we all know Japan's been in relative decline for the last 20 years. The whole world is a better off place with a Japan that's solid, that knows where it's going. And certainly, the relationship between the United States and Japan is a very, very important one, and would only be enhanced by a recovered Japan that really had a more clear sense of direction.
It's interesting, Bill, that at first glance, you see that devastation. You see these apparently insoluble problems with the reactors, and you think it's going to take a long time to fix this up. But then you think of the energy of the Japanese people and their experience after the war, and you think of the media and the way things work in terms of time now in the global village.
Right.
And you realize it's going to be quicker than you think.
Yeah. It's a great country. It will recover.
We wish it well in every way. Local businessman Kyle Tanouye of Talisman LBS was also in Japan at the time of the earthquake and tsunami, and also had a story to tell. Our Asia in Review host, David Day, interviewed Kyle shortly after he returned to Honolulu.
You are basically where in Tokyo when this whole earthquake starts to happen? Where are you?
We're actually located in the central part of Tokyo. So it's a stone throw from Roppongi and Shibuya and Shinjuku.
Okay, and what's the section of the city is called?
It's actually called Minato-ku, which
Minato-ku.
is right, which is just on a stone throw again from Roppongi, which many people I think are familiar. It's where the Tokyo Tower,
Okay.
that many of us are familiar with as well.
All right, so you're very near the Tokyo Tower. All right, and now the warnings start to happen, and how do you get notified of that there's this enormous earthquake coming? What happens in your you're in an office tower,
Right. So
and how high up are you?
We're very fortunate. The office that we have in Tokyo is in a very modern building. It actually has shock absorbers built into it, and we have a mini newsroom, so we're located on the second floor. So considering the modern nature of our building, the floor that we're on, we probably got 1/10 or less of the actual impact that others felt in Tokyo. Nonetheless, though, when the earthquake did come, we were in the middle of a meeting, and there wasn't any sirens or anything. Well, literally, you just felt shaking. And my personal experience was that it was a very big meeting for us, and I had some Japanese clients across
Wait
from
a
me.
second. Do you feel that shaking now?
I
No,
thought
I'm
it was-
just kidding. I'm just kidding.
After a while, you stop feeling
I
it.
know. I went through major earthquakes in San Francisco, and
That's right.
after a while, you get so every little vibration, you think, "Oh my God, here's another one."
Actually, it did have that effect on me for the first few days when you start getting very sensitive to everything, and after that you start getting used to it. But during this meeting, I remember having this discussion with our clients there and seeing a surprised look in their eyes. And my initial thought was, well, hey, it's an earthquake, right? And they said, yes, it's an earthquake. So I said, well, you guys are used to that, right? So no big deal. And I remember for the rest of my life them saying, no, this is different. And
Why was it different? What were they communicating to you at the time? What did they know at that moment?
it was a gut feeling that they had that one, it was an experience they never experienced in their 20 to 30 year life in Tokyo. They're familiar with smaller tremors, things that would come and go.
Okay.
The earthquake that we experienced didn't stop, so it kept on going, and it would go from more severe to less, and it was a continual tremor, probably lasting 3 to 4 minutes. The building actually continues to shake after that, so I don't exactly have an exact time frame of how long the tremors lasted.
Did you have, other than you're in this conference with your Japanese clients, did you have any warning of, or did they have any warning on their mobile phones? There were no sirens, anything. It was just the tremors started to roll.
Right. Just in the initial quake, there wasn't, and that's unfortunately one of the shortfalls of science, I believe. Right. We can predict a particular timing when an earthquake may happen, but there's no system that will tell you within minutes or seconds when it will actually occur.
So that long 3 to 4 minutes, when it's over, you're in this conference room, and describe for us now what does it feel like to be in the middle of a 8.9 magnitude earthquake?
Well, I think it's, to everyone it's a little different, but there's that initial psychological interpretation that you have. Is it real? How serious is it? Am I in a situation where I could die from it, right? And that probably takes a few seconds to several seconds to go through. There's also, a lot of looking at the surroundings, relying on, because I'm a foreigner there, relying on others and how they're reacting to it. In this particular example, there wasn't really an end to it because it was continual. So the shaking lasted long after your brain tells you, okay, now we have to do something about it. So it wasn't like an event that happened that it stopped and then you could react after.
Yeah, so Kyle, you're looking around the conference table there at your Japanese clients. What are they communicating to you on their face, body language, or words? What are they?
It's very much all visual, right? Not many words spoken, just expressions of surprise, fear, body motions of half gesturing we should leave, others under the table. Again, our office wasn't impacted nearly like how some of the others that you may have seen on television. Nonetheless, there was a quick discussion of should we leave or should we go. The protocols for generally earthquake evacuations are that you leave the building, go to a designated safe zone, which in Tokyo happens to be parks.
Okay.
But the challenge is that Tokyo is surrounded by buildings, and most of the injuries happen when you're outside and the buildings fall on you.
You got to get from here to there, right?
Right.
Okay, all right.
So we took a few minutes, I think, about the 3 to 4 minutes to try to assess that. We initially decided it was safer to stay in the building. We did that. After the tremors slowed down a little bit, the initial shock stopped. It was decided, well, we should leave. At that time, the in-building management is very good. There's speakers going on in the building saying to don't use elevators, they're all locked. In Tokyo, and I think in Japan as a whole, all the elevators are held, and they don't operate until an inspector comes back to the building and certifies every building. So it's good and bad, right? You have every building in town that doesn't have elevators now. So where if you're on the 30th floor or the second floor, you're walking.
It's shut down, and it's going to be shut down for a while.
It's shut down, providing that there's no people in there, of course.
Okay.
They let them out, but they won't let anyone else in it. So we evacuated the building, walked out, and the tremors continued, which brought another level of experience to the event. Right.
Okay,
now,
so you come out on the street, and another tremor comes. I mean, what can you see happening to the buildings?
It's a very unique experience where you first of all have to get acclimated to the motions, and it feels like you're on a boat or on the back of a truck is probably what more like it. You don't notice things initially until you look twice. So I looked at a building and I thought, well, I guess it is moving, and you see it literally swaying like how you see it in the movie. Nothing dramatic where you see it crashing and things falling around. We were fortunate to not have that. But we'd see, for instance, I took a picture of Tokyo Tower on how it was swaying, and the tip of it was actually bent. So the antenna at the tip of Tokyo Tower is actually bent permanently from that quake.
From the whiplash of the
From
movement.
the whiplash, right.
Wow.
Right. So it was quite a bit of rocking. Again, Tokyo is a very well-built city, I think, after some of their past experiences. So we didn't see, fortunately, where I was, any buildings coming down. We did see some pieces of things fall down, cables and things like that. Many people on the street, some confusion. But one of the things that was quickly observed was that how trying to find the right word, not patience, but how organized people were and how calm the people were that I noticed. I can only imagine what it might have been if it happened in some of the other cities across the U.S. But in Japan, people tend to form orderly lines. Immediately, the infrastructure got shut down. So the train stop that's mandated as well. They have to be inspected. So it was difficult to get out of the city.
So, but you go to a park there?
Right. So the designated safe zones are that you're walking out of the building, you go to a park, and sometimes that park, in our case, was about a kilometer, 2 kilometers away. So it's not a short hike. There is a side story that in that process, we're constantly worried about things falling on us, but it wasn't as bad, again, as you may think. But the other event that happened was there was another aftershock which triggered the tsunami warnings. So the tsunami warnings, again, what happened in Sendai and Fukushima were triggered by it. But Tokyo also had a tsunami warning.
But you don't know whether there's a tsunami going to hit Tokyo or not, right?
No,
At
we
that
don't.
moment.
Japan's alarm system is very good. So immediately you hear a siren followed by a voice, and the instructions coming out in Japanese saying that there is a tsunami warning that has been issued for Tokyo to seek higher ground. And you're thinking, is this really happening? But it is, and so people orderly again move out of the way, and we were just fortunate that the tsunami, never happened in Tokyo.
Somehow the reports and sensibilities of these two local observers differ from those of CNN and other global media carrying the story. We're delighted we were able to catch them on their return to Hawaii.
Their observations about what happened point out the stunning and continuing effects the earthquake and tsunami will have on Japan, and the likelihood that Japan will be seriously transformed by the experience. It'll be years before we know how this will play out, but it seems clear that Japan will never be quite the same. Our thoughts and prayers are with all of those who have suffered in this tragedy.
Thanks to Ray Tsuchiyama and Kyle Tanouye for talking with us so eloquently and so soon after their return. And thanks to Bill Sharp and David Day for doing these interviews.
Duke, you have family in Japan, so how did this affect you and your family?
I do. When I first heard the news, it was quite startling and troubling. My grandparents live in Tokyo. I tried to call them, couldn't get through because the phone lines were jammed. I was obviously worried. And when I found out that they were okay, it was quite a relief. But things seemed to head south after that, and with this nuclear scares, it's still been hard.
Oh, sure.
They're okay, but
Yeah, but it's
been
not
difficult.
over yet.
It reminds us how fortunate we are.
It's also of some concern to Hawaii. I think if we had an earthquake, and we have had earthquakes,
Sure.
in the past, if we had an earthquake, anything close to that, if we had a tsunami the way they had, Hawaii would have big problems. And now, here's our ThinkTech calendar of events going forward.
On April 28th, ThinkTech and the Hawaii Venture Capital Association will present a luncheon program called Reciprocal Investments Between Hawaii and China.
On May 26th, ThinkTech and HVCA will present another luncheon program called Protest in Hawaii. Sign up for these programs on hvca.org.
And now, here's Bill Spencer, president of the Hawaii Venture Capital Association, with this week's Spensation.
Last week, the governor celebrated his first 100 days in office. And what I observed was that the press and others were pretty tough on him. And that disappointed me, frankly. It's only been 100 days, number one. And number two, our government works slow as molasses. Some of his cabinet appointments weren't even confirmed until last week. So he really didn't have a fully functioning cabinet and government in place. And of course, he's dealing with a budget from last year that he really didn't have any control over. So I think we need to give him more time and be patient. One of his big announcements was, of course, the new technology office, which really has more to do with automating the state and improving our information systems. And I think that obviously is something that's been needed for many years, and it's finally underway. So he didn't waste any time doing that, and I think that's a good thing.
I think people are, remembering the campaign, the platform, remembering all those campaign promises, and they're waiting for them. And that's the problem here. If you have a campaign and you make promises that get people's attention, and certainly they did, then the people have expectations immediately. But
That's
they
true.
don't realize that it takes a little while to get ramped up.
It does. It takes a while, but we've got the Board of Education accomplished. I think there's many things that have been put in motion. And of course, who'd have guessed that the revenue picture would be as drear as it is? Who would have guessed that we'd take a big hit on tourism, likely, from the tsunami? So there are a lot of factors outside of anyone's control. But I'm not making apologies. I think the guy needs a chance to, perform, and 100 days isn't enough time.
Yeah, and you know what else? Things have changed since last fall. We have new issues, new challenges, and they have to be addressed.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.
We'll be right back to wrap up this week's edition of ThinkTech. But first, we want to thank our underwriters.
Thanks to the Scheidler Family Foundation. Jay Scheidler, through the Scheidler Family Foundation, supports a number of educational, cultural, and charitable organizations, including ThinkTech.
Hawaiian Electric Company, HECO and its affiliates Miko on Maui and Helco on the Big Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho. Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company which has a large presence in and commitment to Hawaii.
Oceanit. Oceanit is one of Hawaii's largest and most diversified science and engineering companies.
Okay, Duke, that wraps up this week's edition of ThinkTech. Remember, you can watch ThinkTech on OC16 several times every week, just like he does. For additional times, check out OC16.tv.
For lots more ThinkTech videos and for underwriting and sponsorship opportunities on ThinkTech on OC16, visit thinktechhawaii.com. Be a sponsor and help us reach Hawaii.
I'm Jay Fidell. Thanks for joining us on ThinkTech. Tune in next week for our coverage of the International Auto Show at the Convention Center. See you then.
And I'm Duke Oishi. Aloha, everyone.